Don't. Just don't. No matter what you've heard, no matter how curious you are, don't play this game. Don't buy it, don't rent it, don't watch it on YouTube. Hell, don't even pirate it. Just don't. Why? Because this is an absolutely appalling game from concept to execution. An experience with no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and 20 hours of my life that I will never get back. The fact that this thing, originally cancelled in 2008, has managed to somehow claw its way back into existence is an absolute embarrassment that reveals its developers have no business making games, and its publishers should be ashamed by having it bring down its otherwise solid release roster. The opening moments of the game says it all. Consisting of a supposed flash forward of events to come, the very first thing the game has you do is play a horrifically awful turret section for absolutely no reason, presumably because this section never actually turns up in the game itself. Neither does the quick-time event fight sequence that follows it, a sequence so poorly put together you don't even need to actually press any buttons to win it. These sections leave an unforgivably bad taste in the player's mouth, something that continues once the incredibly cliched plot actually starts. Lead character Jake Conway returns to 1960s America from Vietnam and is immediately thrust into conflict with gang The Devil's Hand after they kill his brother for wearing his father's jacket. Aside from an absolute plethora of padding, the only time this plot gets interesting is when it deviates from the tried and true formula you've seen applied to 1,000 other better stories, and even then it's only because it bungles things in the manner of a car wreck. Horrifying to watch, but you can't stop yourself from doing so. For example, the reason the main villain hated Jake's father? Because he bet his own wife, Jake's mother, on a race, which he lost, before slashing the bad guy's face so the two could flee. Misogyny and sexism like this runs rampant throughout the game, with women being treated as nothing more than objects for men to put their manhoods in. Several times throughout the game, Jake will find a woman being harassed, and as soon as you rescue her by killing her assailants, the game will immediately treat players to the most cringeworthy sex scene imaginable, with both characters remaining fully clothed and almost entirely expressionless. And after a few distinctly unerotic seconds, it's over, and the game jumps you right back where you were, as if so ashamed of what it's done it'd rather forget it ever happened and move along. As well it should, considering these scenes are the worst thing about the game. Which isn't to say the rest of it is any better, of course, just less offensive. When the game's not torturing you with badly animated, badly voiced, and badly written cutscenes, it tends to be divided into 3 sections. Linear driving sections, linear on-foot areas, and a smaller than you'd think hometown. None of these sections are even remotely competent, and it's blatantly obvious, thanks to the incredibly choppy nature of the game and the complete lack of transitional sequences, that the game was originally designed as an open-world one, much like Grand Theft Auto, and has had this element removed for whatever reason. A key example of this is your hometown of Dead End, which is fully modelled and ripe for exploring, but if you step outside the extremely small area containing the 2 shops the game feels like providing, then you are immediately placed back inside the approved area with a turn round message. Dead End also contains your garage, which is where you can pointlessly upgrade your bike. Seriously, there's absolutely no reason to do this. Your bike handles terribly no matter what parts you use, so you might as well just save your time and stick with the default model. Driving is mostly done in straight linear sections, where you'll have to avoid obstacles and defeat enemies using quick-time events, all while fighting the unforgivably bad controls and frustratingly stubborn camera, which will frequently fail to move as you go around corners, leaving you with a side-on view of Jake before you can wrestle the thing back to something approaching tolerable. Occasionally you'll be able to shoot foes in extremely prolonged sections where time slows down and you no longer have to drive, so you can focus on the shooting. But these sections drag on mercilessly and will wear out their welcome extremely quickly, given how many bullets it can take to down an enemy and how hard it is to actually target them, even with the slow motion in effect. This does, however, allow you to take a break from actually trying to drive through the levels, something that will leave you frustrated and annoyed. The controls are highly unresponsive, with your turning speed in particular being astonishingly slow, frequently leading to you slamming into corners. A late-game race places a spotlight on this, leading to Jake slamming into barriers left and right as you try and navigate the small racetrack. This section also highlights just how bad the key bindings are, with the default brake key being R of all things, which is right above the D button, meaning it's nigh impossible to turn right and brake at the same time. And if you thought you could just rebind it to something else, then you'll be impressed to learn that you can't customize the controls, instead just being able to switch between 3 equally awful presets. In fact, the PC port is so awful, the game doesn't even give you the option to change the resolution. The only way to do so is to manually edit an INI file. This would be embarrassing 10 years ago, but in this day and age, it's practically a criminal offense. As for the on-foot sections that make up the majority of the game, well, as I'm sure you've surmised by now, these are plagued by issues as well. Every single level is full of brain-dead enemies that either try to sprint towards cover right next to you, allowing you plenty of time to line up headshots, time you'll need to wrestle the camera into the right position, or enemies who simply charge at you with melee weapons, which you yourself are under no obligation to use most of the time, allowing you to dispatch most of them before they even come close to you. When the AI decides to actually kick in and tell your opponents to take cover more than 5 feet away from you, You'll find that combat is basically a matter of waiting for enemies to pop up so you can shoot them in the face. You won't even need to bother using cover yourself for the majority of the game, because the bad guys are so hopelessly inaccurate that until the last few missions they'll barely ever hit you. Until you do hit those last few missions, at which point their accuracy and the difficulty of the game ramps up considerably, meaning the game goes from being a tiresome chore to an absolute nightmare. There's also a hand-to-hand fighting system, but it's so badly put together you'll wish there wasn't. Ostensibly, you're supposed to be able to attack enemies with a variety of weapons, countering attacks and switching between other enemies on the fly. But in reality it all boils down to mashing the attack button and occasionally having to break the enemy's block by hitting a different one. Alternatively, you can just keep using that move instead. It'll take longer, but it's unblockable, and there's a certain amusement in watching Jake slowly kick an enemy to death. Once, anyway. As for the weapons, they're all pretty much interchangeable. Aside from the different animations that play when you use them, the melee weapons are all essentially the same, each doing roughly the same amount of damage, so you might as well just use whatever. And if you do happen to prefer one, then get ready to lose it in the driving sections, because when you QTE an enemy to death, you'll automatically take their weapon from them. So if you had a particular fondness for the axe, then get ready to have it replaced with a truncheon whenever you have to unjustifiably kill a cop. Yes, you heard right. Jake's journey will make him do numerous questionable things in his quest for vengeance, none of which make him even remotely endearing. Killing innocent cops and power plant workers, brutally gunning down countless people, and viciously torturing numerous villains, Jake enters the game as a thoroughly unlikable protagonist who makes some of the most unbelievably stupid decisions throughout the game, like blowing up the state's power station simply to disable a single electric fence, or wasting time running errands for a blatantly lying German woodlogger. Which leads me to the voice work, or whatever the hell these people are doing, because I'll know if they actually call it acting. To say that this is some of the poorest and most unenthusiastic performances ever heard in a video game would be an understatement. Jake's voice actor sounds like he's just woken up, almost every single woman sounds the same, except for the one with the inexplicable faux British accent, and the villains range from barely even trying to munching on the scenery so hard they're shattering their teeth. In combination with the frankly laughable graphics that wouldn't have passed muster even in 2008, character animations that feel ripped from an episode of Thunderbirds, and infrequent QTEs that literally freeze the game until you press the required key, cutscenes, much like everything else about the game, are almost painful to put up with. If this was some student project put together in a couple of months, a lot of the game's flaws, like the horrific camera controls or the basic button-mashing hand-to-hand combat, would be understandable, if not entirely forgivable. But the fact this was made by supposed professional developers and sold for full price is shocking. Which is why I say don't. I don't want people to play this game. I don't want the developers to work in this industry again. I don't want this on my Steam list, and I most definitely don't want to remember the time I wasted on this insipid, miserable, pathetic excuse for a game. Please, just don't.